Shakespeare's Henry V arguably delivers some of the finest speeches ever written in the English language. Outside Harfleur, he spurs his army on to even greater efforts with the famous lines that begin, "Once more unto the breach, dear friends, once more, or close the walls up with our English dead." Whilst before the Battle of Agincourt itself, he declares memorably that gentlemen in England now abed shall think themselves accursed that they were not here, and hold their manhoods cheap, whilst any speaks that fought with us upon St. Crispin's day. But what of the character behind the famous lines, learnt dutifully by ex-public and grammar school boys from a certain era, and proclaimed above trembling knee in front of cane-brandishing, mustachioed master and fellow pupils? And how does this character come across in Act 1 of the play? Well, stay tuned, you're watching Schofield on Shakespeare. Shakespeare sticks closely to the genuine Henry V figure from history in his portrayal of his deeply held Christian beliefs. In his opening exchange with the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Bishop of Ely refers to Henry as a true lover of the Holy Church, which would seem to be confirmed by the latter's determination to obtain religious justification and support for war with France. Urging Canterbury to speak truthfully, he asks him to proceed and justly and religiously unfold why the law Salic that they have in France or should not bar us in our claim. Even when the French ambassador arrives with what will turn out to be a deeply insulting gift, Henry is at pains to stress that we are no tyrant but a Christian king. Of course, Ely and Canterbury have a vested interest in supporting Henry's claim for France. For in exchange, he may oppose or at least remain indifferent to a long-standing bill proposed by Parliament that would result in the Church losing the better half of our possession. A further consideration, which isn't alluded to specifically, is that war in France would result in the indefinite postponement of domestic issues, including any bills aimed at stripping down the considerable wealth and power of the Church. Nonetheless, Shakespeare's Henry V makes such frequent references to God and his religious faith that there is no reason to doubt his devotion. But what makes Henry a more interesting character than your conventional religious zealot is that before he was king, he was a riotous, idle, heavy-drinking layabout, rather like you and me, dear viewers and loyal subscribers. Canterbury and Ely praise Henry V's current religious devotion, but reveal he has changed enormously since his coronation. In a withering tirade, Canterbury describes Henry's previous persona as one addicted to courses vain, his companies unlettered, rude and shallow, his hours filled up with riots, banquets, sports, and never note in him any study. He used to hang around with illiterate, unlettered and ignorant men, and in general couldn't stop himself from indulging in foolish, undignified behaviour. It was an addiction for him, no less. The extent of the youthful Henry's follies is summed up in Canterbury's imagery, referring to his hydra-headed willfulness. The hydra was a gigantic, nine-headed water serpent from Greek mythology, killed by that great hero, Hercules, who found that each time he chopped off a head, two more grew in its place. Canterbury's use of this image reveals the scope and range of young Henry's wildness. It has been a part of every aspect of his existence, multiplying when checked, making his sudden, immediate abstinence and complete character transformation all the more astonishing. Part of this character transformation has seen a shift from sack-supping lout to adroit, knowledgeable politician. Canterbury reveals admiringly, "Hear him debate of Commonwealth affairs. You would say it hath all been all in his study." And so when Henry explores issues relating to domestic policy, he gives the impression that he has spent his entire life familiarising himself with its intricacies and nuts and bolts. even when the matter is particularly complex. Canterbury vows that the Gordian knot of it he will unloose, like his reference to young Henry's hydra-headed willfulness. This is another allusion to Greek legends, this time to a knot made by a poor peasant called Gordius, when tying up an ox cart which he had dedicated to Zeus. Many people tried, but no one was able to untie it. Yet with this imagery, Canterbury is suggesting that Henry can unravel the impossible, is almost godlike in his ability to disentangle hideously knotted domestic political issues that no one else can get to the bottom of. This adroitness is seen in Act 1, Scene 2, when Henry is the first to make reference to the dangers of leaving England relatively unguarded during any potential foray into France. He points out, "We must not only arm to invade the French, but lay down our proportions to defend against the Scots, who will make road upon us with all advantages." The word that sums up Henry's keen practical brain is the mathematical proportions. Taking a huge armed force to France would be sheer folly, and the numbers to be taken need to be balanced proportionally against the numbers needed to be available against potentially opportunistic weasel Scots. But the latter ungallant reference is spoken by the Earl of Westmoreland, not Henry himself, who remains at all time a dignified, eloquent and frequently mesmerising orator. Prior to his arrival on stage, we are told that when he speaks about war, the listener hears a fearful batter rendered you in music. Music, generically, is considered a beautiful art form with the power to move, and these words suggest that Henry can verbally transform something as brutal, bloody and dirty as war into something gently inspiring, in spite of teenage years that Shakespeare rather unfairly dismisses as simply hedonistic. After all, before becoming king, he had fought valiantly at Shrewsbury and had commanded the army in successive campaigns against Owen Glendower in Wales. He is able to use language to magnificent effect, has no trouble in conjuring up sweet and honeyed sentences, should they befit the occasion. Other occasions call for different applications of his oratory eloquence, most notably when presented with the insulting gift of tennis balls by the French Dauphin, incidentally another dramatic fiction according to John Julius Norwich. Following a polite yet certainly sarcastic retort, he makes this memorable vow: "When we have matched our rackets to these balls, we will in France, by God's grace, play a set shall strike his father's crown into the hazard." Once again there is the reference to a Christian God, but more pertinently, Henry uses the gift to skillfully create his own threatening imagery. In tennis at the time, a hazard was an opening in the wall. Whacking the ball into this opening scored a point. But just like today, it also means something that is dangerous and likely to cause damage. Henry is suggesting that this deeply offensive gift will help trigger a metaphorical game of war tennis back in France, in which King Charles VI's crown will be used as a ball, smashed off the court, resulting in the latter's dethronement, with Henry taking his place. Branagh's 1989 movie version of the play sees Branagh for a change in the title role. His reaction when presented with the tennis balls is to keep terrifyingly still. Look how he delivers the same lines.
When we have matched our rackets to these balls, we will in France, by God's grace, play a set, shall strike his father's crown into the hazard.
He remains seated, looks straight at the ambassador without blinking, and speaks in a very quiet, clear voice, with only the vigorously enunciated t of set, confirming a sense of controlled, currently repressed fury. The overall effect is one of a man of dignity, who is in control of his emotions and himself, and who means every single word that he says. Nonetheless, Henry's earlier words indicate that he knows all too well that war is very far from being a mere game or sport, or something to be conjured up in a fit of pique. When urging Canterbury to explain whether a war with France can be justified, he emphasises the seriousness of what they are contemplating. "For God doth know how many now in health shall drop their blood in approbation of what your reverence shall incite us to." War results in a transformation far more significant than even Henry's own shift from layabout to learned. Previously healthy men inevitably shed copious amounts of blood and lose their lives, making it vital that such decisions are not taken lightly. Henry recognises that England versus France on the battlefield always results in a great deal of bloodshed, whose guiltless drops are every one a woe. Each loss of life needs to be taken account of, and if the war is unjust, then each death or injury is a cause for real sadness and shame. For Henry may be 25 and have a past crammed with revelry and debauchery, yet he does have a conscience, and one informed by his knowledge of past history. Developing his point about the need to keep a wary eye on Scotland, Henry declares, "For you shall read that my great-grandfather never went with his forces into France, but that the Scot on his unfurnished kingdom came pouring like the tide into the breach." Henry's great-grandfather was Edward III, who was continually frustrated by military setbacks caused by the Scots in alliance with the French. The simile referring to Scots pouring like the tide into a breach suggests how quickly and seamlessly they can espy weaknesses within English defence systems. Just like the sea can pour so rapidly through a crack within a seawall, so Scotland historically has moved in and taken advantage when England has been distracted by concerns elsewhere on the continent. Henry, the accomplished, conscientious, religious politician with a broad grasp of history, is keen not to repeat the mistakes of his ancestors. Yet this prudence is balanced by a quick-fire temper that will not, cannot tolerate crass gestures from potential opponents. Moving away from tennis ball imagery, Henry vows to the French ambassador that many 1,000 widows shall this his mock out of their dear husbands, mock mothers from their sons, mock castles down, and some are yet ungotten and unborn, that shall have cause to curse the Dauphin's scorn. Henry's use of anatonoclasis, whereby the same word is reused but with a different meaning, is seen in the repetition of mock. His mock sees the word first used as a noun, referring to the Dauphin's crude gesture of presenting Henry with tennis balls as a taunt to his own supposed youth and immaturity. This gesture will mock, now used as a verb, widows out of their dear husbands, shall cheat them of their beloved partners. Now there is no doubt that Henry is outraged by the Dauphin's gift, but we can also see a quick-thinking political mind at work here, as well as characteristically brilliant emotive rhetoric. The audience already know that Henry has decided to wage war with France. After all, he said explicitly, "We must arm to invade the French," before the ambassador even entered. However, he seizes this opportunity to put the full blame of an English invasion of France, with its subsequent catastrophic cost to human life, family relationships and infrastructure, squarely on the Dauphin. The mission can now be branded as one necessary to uphold the King's and England's dignity and good name, to venge me as I may, to get revenge on a despicable, intolerable insult. Going back to Branagh's production, the King has risen from his seat and replaced apparently calm yet obviously repressed fury with decisive movements and a raised voice. Here are the same lines.
For many 1,000 widows shall this his mock out of their dear husbands, mock mothers from their sons, mock castles down, and some are yet ungotten and unborn that shall have cause to curse the Dauphin's scorn.
The clarity of Henry's enunciation remains, especially in the k sound within the word mock, highlighting his decisiveness, whilst the moving, stirring string phrases in the background reflect the fact that there will be tragic consequences to this insult. For the medium shot of 30 seconds earlier, showing Henry sitting immovable and stately on his throne, the camera has moved into a close-up. We can see the black determination in his eyes, glimpses of bared teeth, as he makes sure that every single word is heard and understood. This is a man who has clearly jettisoned past follies and has absolute belief in his own authority and right both to the French throne and not to be humiliated. Notably, Henry maintains his dignity faced with indignity. The ambassador is told courteously to get you hence in peace, and his entourage must be conveyed with safe conduct. Act 1 sees Henry come across as a changed man, a devout Christian, an eloquent orator, skillful politician, and someone whom it is wise not to cross or insult. In Act 2, He is all of this, yet we saw a more personal side in his bitter denunciation of his close former friend Lord Scroop, hints of ruthlessness in references to discarding of old friends, and enormous self-control and an appetite for precisely timed theatre when faced with 3 traitors who have plotted with the French to kill him. But these will form the topic of my next Shakespeare video. This has been a Schofield on Shakespeare production, exploring the character of Henry V in Act 1. Thanks for watching.